The stuff of Wolfey's nightmares officially comes to the big screen here at False Swipe Gaming, as we're going over the most iconic competitive Pokemon of the official VGC format. The professional wrestling tiger from the Alola region, Incineroar itself. It's finally time to dive into this white whale of the competitive scene, and since there's so much to tell, in singles as well as VGC, we won't waste any more time. We'll jump right in and start with how great was Incineroar actually. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Incineroar wasn't initially worth too much in its debut generation, when its only ability was the Firestarter standard Blaze. It hit hard and had solid natural bulk, but its speed stat really held it back. It had plenty to like after all. A bulkier physical Houndoom is not a bad premise, with the lower speed a trade-off for the ability to better make use of its unique resistance palette. But it did mean its ceiling was quite low. As a result, even several months into Ultra Sun and Moon, Incineroar was seen as not more than a decent to average to mediocre Pokemon in NU. With an Assault Vest set, it could lean into its bulk to act as a check to things like Delphox, while offering the universally excellent utility of U-Turn and Stab Knockoff, but low speed, lack of recovery, and a Stealth Rock weakness limited just how much it was going to be able to utilize such superb tools. Of course, it then received Intimidate, and it skyrocketed to elite status in NU, becoming one of the tier's best, most defining Pokemon on account of gaining one of the game's most effective hit weakening abilities, and its switch-in opportunities exploding through the roof accordingly. Well, what of its lack of recovery, especially in the face of its Stealth Rock weakness? While in the past, the time-honored tradition of the Leftovers Protect combo may have worked, but Gen 7 had buffed the pinch healing berries too, upon its user hitting 25% or less HP, restoring a whopping 50%. In singles, it took a while for these to be discovered for the pseudo-super items they were, but once they were, they took off, and Incineroar was one of the Pokemon that most demonstrated their incredible power. Suddenly, this Pokemon with a Stealth Rock weakness and no recovery, rather than having the impressive hit-taking of its bulk investment effortlessly undermined, was instead sticking around for entire games on a regular basis. Its Rock's weakness, while certainly far from ideal, was also much less pressuring than it normally would be, since in the event Incineroar's teammates couldn't keep Rocks off, the Rocks would wind up tripping Incineroar's Figgy Berry. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it didn't need to be. All it had to do was let Incineroar take its targets on once or twice more, and that it did beautifully. Incineroar was especially well designed for this. In fact, because the extra recoil for its Fire Stab Flare Blitz could also lower its own health, knocking itself into that 25% benchmark so it could get that huge 50% back. The two Incineroar standards were established. First, the defensive pivot, which made the most of its hit-taking ability, beyond what is most directly answered, like the Ice Megas, Glalie, and Abomasnow. This is already an amazing trait to have. It was excellent in, like many Intimidate users, being able to withstand hits from seemingly everything, or at the very least, darting in and out of battle to soften hits for its teammates. And to make matters better, it was also quite apt at taking hits on the special side from threats like Comfrey and Whimsicott. Second, there was the all-out offensive Swords Dancer, which was geared more towards wall breaking, yet still usually used Figgy Berry's immense recovery, its health reinforcement in turn making it easier to throw around its boosted attacks, especially Flare Blitz. Alternatively, if it was willing to be more cautious with its health and its team didn't have another Z-move user, offensive Swords Dance Incineroar could also go with the extra power of its signature Z-Crystal, Incinium Z, trading in its usual Stab Knockoff for Darkness Lariat, which would, as a Z-move, be boosted into a massive 180 base power malicious Moonsault, crushing would-be checks like Blastoise and Druddigon after a Swords Dance. Dual Screens offense teams could also use a highly specialized set holding Weakness Policy and using Bulk Up and Flame Charge to safely accrue as many boosts as possible for a Power Trip sweep. But again, this was incredibly specific, relegated as it was to Dual Screens offense. The Pivot and the SDR were what launched Incineroar to NU Superstar status, and what it would carry with it into future iterations of the lower tier. But now it's time to dive into VGC. Let's face it, everyone who clicked on this video has heard of just how incredible Incineroar was at VGC. Many of you, however, would be surprised to know that this wasn't always the case. Incineroar's inception in the VGC format started quite humbly, as it didn't possess the Intimidate ability or a strong support move pool that it came to be feared by. Instead, Incineroar was much like the other fire starters, an offensive threat with access to strong stab physical moves in the form of Flare Blitz and its signature move, Darkness Lariat. Incineroar also possessed the coveted Fake Out, allowing it to support other offensive strategies like Swords Dance, Aurora Veil, or Trick Room in order to maximize the pain for Incineroar's opponents. Incineroar also had access to other interesting options like Roar, which served as a deterrent to opposing Trick Room setters, and Throat Chop, which combated the elusive Perish Song and Hyper Voice abusers in the 2017 format. The Wrestling Tiger also had access to Will-O-Wisp to deter physical attackers that tried to stand in front of it. Incineroar's item of choice was predominantly its signature Incinium Z, which allowed it to wield a powerful, malicious moonsault capable of evaporating any non-resistant Pokemon, turning would-be checks into easy KOs. Incineroar players also experimented with Assault Vest variants, allowing the menacing cat to face strong special attackers in the format, and what would become its signature item in the future, the 50% heal berries. Although these options were strong, most players opted to go for the offensive route rather than the bulky support role because Incineroar had two very notable flaws. For one, its low base 60 speed stat was easily outdone by many Pokemon in the format, making it an easy target for faster Pokemon to double up on, especially if it had an all-out attacking set like Assault Vest. The second significant flaw Incineroar had was its typing. Incineroar was extremely vulnerable to many common threats in the format. Ground and fighting types like Garchomp, Komodo, Buzzwole, Hariyama, Crocodile, and Marowak had a field day fighting Incineroar, while rain teams and water Pokemon in general exploited its water weakness easily and picked up free kills left and right when facing Incineroar teams. Most players in the 2017 VGC format preferred the similar but faster and bulkier Arcanine. Arcanine had many similar traits to Incineroar, like access to strong physical fire stab, Will-O-Wisp, and Roar, but it also had a couple things Incineroar only dreamed of getting: Intimidate and a way faster speed stat. Thanks to Intimidate, Arcanine could use the 50% berries much more comfortably than Incineroar, sticking around for longer and even looping back and forth with other Intimidate users on the team. Its high speed stat also allowed it to spread burns around everywhere, disabling would-be physical threats in an instant. Arcanine was so good in 2017 VGC that it was in fact the most used Pokemon in the format. Meanwhile, Incineroar was merely a Pokemon in the format. Potential man, as the kids say. Its placings were few and far between, like Arash Omari, who got 26 at the London International that year, Ian McLaughlin, who placed third at the Athens Regionals, and Sejin Park, who managed to land a third place at the Korean Nationals in 2017. Incineroar was one of the Pokemon of all time, and it could only dream of having Intimidate and becoming something more. A Vatican-approved miracle is a sign or wonder, such as a healing, that is extraordinary, inexplicable by natural laws, and exclusively attributed to divine power. Many Pokemon fans like to wonder about such scenarios. What would happen if Shedinja got sturdy? Will we ever get Nogar Fisher Machamp? Are the kids safe if Mega Rayquaza got Aerialate? In the world of Pokemon, miracles of this sort of seem scarce, but they do happen every once in a while. For the VGC 2018 format, with the release of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Incineroar received the ability to Intimidate. This change was everything that Incineroar had ever needed in order to become a viable Pokemon in VGC. Gone were the days where it had to fear physical attackers or envy Arcanine. Intimidate flipped Incineroar's dynamic entirely on its head. It was the linchpin necessary to give its entire moveset cohesion. Facing Incineroar was now truly a nightmare. Having Intimidate on a Pokemon makes it an auto consideration for any team, but a Pokemon that is capable of intimidating and using Fake Out was elite. Scrafty and Hitmontop had become staples in previous VGC formats for that very reason. As if Arceus had not been gracious enough with Incineroar, it also received several extremely powerful tools that it benefited even more from with Ultra Sun and Moon. It was one thing to be one of the elite VGC Pokemon with access to Fake Out and Intimidate, but Incineroar transcended that category easily with all of its new toys. Its newfound access to Knockoff ensured that nothing wanted to be in front of Incineroar. If you tried switching out your intimidated Pokemon for something that could check it, you suddenly lost your item. You couldn't kill it in one shot, you lost your item. The utility behind the move wasn't the only thing that made Knockoff terrifying too. It was also extremely powerful. This was effectively a 97.5 base power move being launched from quite a respectable base 115 attack stat. Nothing enjoyed taking a Knockoff to the face. Item removal in VGC is invaluable, and Incineroar had enough bulk to do it to entire teams. Incineroar also gained access to great coverage moves like Stomping Tantrum and Low Kick that allowed it to face Pokemon it previously would have fled from, like Tyranitar, Heatran, and Snorlax. Incineroar also gained access to Snatch, which could catch boosting opponents by surprise and turn Incineroar into the scariest Pokemon on the field. Additionally, the acquisition of Intimidate allowed Incineroar to make some of its old toys feel brand new. U-Turn in particular was utilized in most of the cat's variants in order to start Intimidate cycling with the rest of its team. Incineroar also used Snarl to great success with many of its variants, as lowering the opponent's offense on both sides of the spectrum proved to be extremely powerful in conjunction with items like Weakness Policy, as Incineroar softened the blows for its teammates while simultaneously aiding offensively. There was just nothing that the cat couldn't do. Even more incredibly, its previous flaw of being too slow and having to switch out in certain scenarios was turned into an advantage. Incineroar switching out meant that it would have to switch back in, and no VGC player wanted to deal with two Intimidates. Its passivity was aggressive, except Incineroar wasn't a mean girl. It was the bus running over Regina George. Gen 7's mechanics also benefited Incineroar Incineroar in unforeseen ways. Generation 7 nerfed the Prankster ability to make moves given priority fail against Dark-type Pokemon, and you guessed it, Incineroar was a Dark-type Pokemon. This meant that Incineroar's very existence was a threat to some of VGC's previous All-Stars like Thundurus and Whimsicott. Speaking of threats that Incineroar matched up well against, the answer was pretty much everything. It loved taking on every Tapu not named Feeny, both Mega Charizards, Mega Gengar, Kartana, Metagross, Cresselia, Heatran, Zapdos, Amoonguss, Kangaskhan, Salamence, Snorlax, Slowbro, Rotom, Mimikyu, Aegislash, Gardevoir, Ferrothorn, Gothitelle, Volcarona, you name it. Incineroar found a way to beat it. Incineroar's most popular set was now the 50% Berry set, but it could really do it all. Needed to deal with special attackers? Slap on an Assault Vest. Had a tough time with ground types? Give it a Shuka Berry. Scared of getting spored? Safety Goggles. The heal Pokemon also ironically found a new best friend in the form of Landorus Therian. Landorus dealt beautifully with the pesky ground and fighting types that Incineroar could struggle with even after an Intimidate, and also had Intimidate, which meant that switching out against a bad matchup suddenly turned into a -2 for any physical attacker trying to go toe-to-toe with the cat. Incineroar truly became the first open world Pokemon. You could literally give it any moveset and item, and it would cook you a Michelin star meal. Incineroar was so dominant that it was present in 50% of teams in the VGC 2018 format. This meant that the metagame was split into two types of teams, the teams that won and the teams that didn't. And boy did Incineroar love to win. In fact, with the passage of time, Incineroar became the Pokemon with the most accolades in Pokemon history, having earned more than $1 million in prizing and 19,743 Worlds points in total. Incineroar literally took a page out of DJ Khaled's book, and all it did was win, no matter what. Here are just its first place finishes at major events in the 2018 format. Incineroar was so dominant that not only did it win Worlds along with almost every event in 2018, but it was present in almost every top placing at every tournament. This video could be literally 13 hours long if we had to count everything below a first place, but to make things clear, Incineroar was present in 5 out of the top 8 teams at Worlds in 2018, and Paul Ruiz's World Championship is largely attributed to his creative building both around Incineroar's strengths and using dedicated answers like Z-Move Gastrodon in order to ensure the leverage that his own Intimidators brought to the table in the mirror match. Incineroar was just a cat, but in 2018, you could tell he was the GOAT. Wrestling fans say that a wrestler's story is everything to it. Incineroar had come up from a humble origin and received powers beyond human comprehension that let it reach Herculean glory. Now in the 2019 format, it was time for Incineroar to defend its title as world champion, and it now had to do it against the big boys. 2019 was a restricted format that reintroduced some of Pokemon's most dominant forces back into the metagame. Incineroar now had to contend with Kyogre, Groudon, Rayquaza, Xerneas, Yveltal, Lunala, Solgaleo, the Necrozma forms, Ho-Oh, and many other extremely powerful Pokemon. To make things even more problematic for everybody's favorite cat, power creep was introduced gradually into the 2019 format, as it gradually started allowing to use Z moves, Mega Evolutions, and Primal forms. Could Incineroar really handle everything that was being thrown at it? The answer to this question was yes, and resoundingly so. In 2018, Incineroar had been present in around 50% of the teams that competed, but in 2019, its presence was felt in around 75% of teams for the Sun Series and Ultra Series, and 90% of teams for the Moon Series. These numbers were astounding, and it was perhaps in this format where people truly understood how insanely powerful Incineroar actually was. It turns out that all of the Pokemon that were thought to have a positive matchup against Incineroar also greatly benefited from its supportive capabilities. Kyogre loved the Intimidate and Fake Out support in order to ravage the opposition. Xerneas dealt with the pesky Steel types that threatened it previously much better with the Fire type intimidating and allowing it to click Geomancy comfortably with Fake Out support. Groudon made Incineroar's Flare Blitz much more menacing. Its partial Dark typing still ruined the Genies, and it coupled beautifully with other Intimidate users in order to reduce the threat that was Mega Rayquaza. Incineroar shut down every version of Necrozma with ease and supported the defensive Lunala that became popular in Ultra Series, making it nigh unkillable with Snarl and Intimidate support. Everything Incineroar had done previously, it did on a grander scale, using exactly the same sets as before and tailoring its specific item and tech choices to the needs of the rest of the team. Once again, there is nothing Incineroar couldn't do. Incineroar tore through placings once more, proving that it couldn't only hang with the very best Pokemon, it was the very best. Here is every first place in the 2019 season that Incineroar earned. Once again, Incineroar proved its mettle by defending its title as Pokemon World Champion. Naoto Mizobuchi's team supported a powerful Primal Groudon Lunala shell that was backed by the strong offensive threats of Mega Salamence and Incineroar, while leveraging the utility provided by Stakataka and Tapu Fini. The core of the team centered around Groudon's Sunlight, enabling Lunala's healing along with a double Intimidate cycle, while simultaneously hitting extremely hard on both ends of the spectrum, with Groudon, Lunala, Mega Mence, and Incineroar's offensive prowess. 2019 was the breaking point in Incineroar's career, and things only seemed to look up from there. Incineroar had its beloved Pinch Heal berries nerfed in Gen 7, but what would ordinarily be a viability-ruining nerf was immediately forgotten in the wake of the incredible series of buffs bestowed upon it, chief among them the heavy-duty boots that now let it completely ignore its previous enemy's Stealth Rock. This was perfect for its Pivot and Swords Dance sets alike, with the former's lack of healing offset by the fact that it'd be tanking hits so much more easily without the interference of hazards, which would also give the SDer much greater freedom in boosting and firing off Flare Blitzes. Additionally, its Pivot set now offered even more support because it had a new option for a switch move, the attack and special attack lowering Parting Shot, making the teammate it brought in even better off against the target. Meanwhile, on the offensive end of things, it gained tremendous coverage in close combat, which among its many other valuable targets like Rhyperior, meant it was now able to aptly threaten opposing Incineroar. Fairly early into Sword and Shield, Incineroar actually had some use in OU alongside Wish Teleport Clefable, as Teleport having been buffed into a negative priority switch move allowed Clefable to send its Wish to basically whatever it wanted, and Incineroar loved the reinforcement of its health. This didn't last, as Incineroar just didn't have the stats to go up against OU's heavy hitters or the capability to leave some sort of real impact, but hey, it was seeing use in standard play, however brief. However, Incineroar's main place for quite some time in Gen 8 was UU, where it was very good. In fact, in the metagame's fledgling stages, Incineroar was among the best Pokemon in the tier alongside Noivern and Rillaboom, and while most of Incineroar's time in UU didn't see it so utterly towering over the competition, it was absolutely superb. It actually started out in RU, but it was so good in UU, it rose almost instantly. Once again, it was all about pivot sets, whose lack of recovery incidentally was beautifully helped by Rillaboom's grassy terrain, which also weakened Earthquake's aimed Incineroar's way, making it especially difficult to take out. It was also quite an apt special hit taker once again, since Intimidate did so much of the heavy lifting on the physical side. Special defense investment let Incineroar take hits on both sides, making the most of its typing's capability to withstand attacks from threats like Chandelure, Gardevoir, Reuniclus, and Celebi. Swords Dance, on the other hand, was more generally straightforward, really relishing in that close combat addition, but sometimes threw Flame Charge in the mix as Fire Stab. Much weaker than Flare Blitz, yes, but it also provided a speed boost which could potentially spiral quickly against unsuspecting opponents. Though it was generally a more specific choice, it just spoke to Incineroar's amazing flexibility. Instead of close combat, its Swords Dance set could also use U-Turn, two moves that usually don't go together, but Incineroar's early game utility was often too good to pass up. Conversely, even the bulky pivot set could sometimes slot Swords Dance in to surprise opponents and overwhelm defensive Pokemon later in the game. Regardless of the actual set, early game use of U-Turn could throw opponents off the scent of Swords Dance popping up later on. To offer such vastly different forms of value was so rare, but Incineroar really was a Pokemon for all seasons. The eventual Dex expansion of the Crown Tundra meant Incineroar wouldn't last in UU, but that was fine, as it basically ported its UU games over to RU, UU on Swords and sets and all, and was dominant in pretty much exactly the same way. It helped that it was facing many familiar faces from the previous iteration of UU, like Celebi and Gardevoir. Its pivot set was amazing in how it could do something to what felt like everything. Sure, it updated itself a bit for the meta. It used Overheat as its Fire Stab to more quickly threaten physically defensive steals like Steelix and Metagross, as well as Fluffy Beware, and it really reveled in efficiently spreading Toxic, seeing as steals and poisons didn't want to come anywhere near it. But the basic setup of its typing alongside Intimidate, Knockoff, a switch move, and heavy duty boots was so good, it could have done pretty much anything. Nothing really liked switching into Incineroar, and Incineroar liked switching into, well, not literally everything, but what often felt dangerously close to it, like a lower tier Landorus Therian. With such improvement on its previous NU placement, mostly thanks to boots, Incineroar wound up actually doing better in its sophomore generation of singles. And on that note, it's time to return to VGC. A new generation and new mechanics often mean that Pokemon who were previously unbeatable fall off with the passage of time and adjustment of game mechanics. This was not the case with Incineroar. For some reason that goes beyond the comprehension of mere mortals, Game Freak gave Incineroar buffs. The player base finding out that Incineroar somehow acquired access to Parting Shot was an eye-opening, bewildering experience, much like finding out that the Rolling Stones is just a synonym for rock and roll. Thus, fittingly, Parting Shot's addition to Incineroar rocked the world of competitive Pokemon and rolled all all the competition. Parting Shot was the perfect addition to Incineroar's move pool. Previously, if Incineroar wanted to pivot defensively, it had to hard switch into a partner that could deal with the situation more efficiently, or it could utilize U-turn in order to play around a predicted switch into a pivot into the right counter. Although U-turn was already considered extremely powerful and efficient, Parting Shot was even more powerful as it left the Pokemon it targeted with a -1 debuff to both of its special attack and physical attack, while it also switched. This meant that one good callout from an Incineroar player could leave a potential physical attacking Pokemon at -3 if Incineroar chose to tag into another Intimidate user. The VGC format's explosive nature often meant that forcing the opponent to switch out or give you a free turn where you aren't threatened at all by a -3 Pokemon resulted in an easy win. Incineroar's presence was absolutely overwhelming because of this, and its presence was pretty much mandatory in any team that was trying to compete. This same Intimidate cycling strategy that it often employed alongside its BFF Landorus Therian was also greatly beneficial in dealing with this generation's signature mechanic, Dynamax. The numerous amount of physical sweepers that could go big and boost up were suddenly shut down by a revolving door of Intimidates that rendered them useless. Another significant change to the VGC landscape was the nerf to 50% berries, meaning that Incineroar players had to get a bit more resourceful in order to maximize the heal Pokemon's capabilities. Players often opted to utilize Citrus Berry for its bursting healing capabilities, but tried several previously effective items like Assault Vest, Safety Goggles, and even the nerfed 50% berries. The surprise element coupled well with the Dynamax metagame, and Incineroar put resist berries like Paschal, Chople, and Shuka to great use. Some players even chose to run surprise sets with items like Air Balloon or Weakness Policy to net a couple of surprise KOs. The new Pokemon revealed in the Galarian Pokedex also provided new great allies to Incineroar's repertoire, notably Rillaboom. Rillaboom's Grassy Surge ability set grassy terrain onto the battlefield, which weakened the power of Earthquake and severely reduced options to strike at Incineroar while simultaneously healing it. Rillaboom also had access to U-turn and Fake Out, making it an excellent complement to Incineroar's powerful pivot strategy. Additionally, even with the revolving door of series rule sets, Incineroar matched up beautifully into many of the new coming Pokemon of the Galar region. It shut down opposing Rillaboom, Grimmsnarl, Dragapult, Cinderace, Darmanitan Galar, Galarian Moltres, and many others. Restricted formats were no different, as Incineroar was the perfect answer to both versions of Calyrex. Incineroar was a force to be reckoned with, and the Galar region wasn't going to stop it. Sadly, due to the real-world complications that happened during this time period, offline competitive play was suspended, which significantly reduced just how many major events Incineroar could have won. Competitive play, however, endured through the online environment, and then the height of online competition came in the form of the Online Players Cup. Once again, Incineroar showed utter dominance and won all of them. Santino Tarquinio won Players Cup with a team consisting of Incineroar, Dragapult, Rillaboom, Urshifu Rapid-Strike, Coalossal, and Togekiss. Santino's team used a bulky Assault Vest Incineroar set that mixed the great utility provided by Snarl and U-turn to weaken the opposition. This Incineroar supported the team alongside Dragapult and Togekiss that carried redirection moves like Follow Me and Ally Switch, while simultaneously debuffing the opposition via Intimidate, Screens, and Breaking Swipe. This powerful defensive backbone was maintained healthy by a Choice Band Rillaboom and its Grassy Surge ability in order to secure the team's main win condition. Urshifu Rapid Strike's Aqua Jet, triggering Colossal Steam Engine and Weakness Policy. The results of this combination were particularly devastating and allowed Santino Tarquino to take the crown during the first Players Cup. The combination and team was so potent that in fact, WolfeyGlick won the second Players Cup with a very similar team. WolfGlick utilized a team of Incineroar, Dragapult, Rillaboom, Urshifu Rapid Strike, and Galarian Moltres. Wolfey chose to forgo the redirection aspect of the team and instead added a new element of Nasty Plot Galarian Moltres that gave the team more depth. WolfGlick also brought more defensive Rillaboom and Incineroar sets, outfitting his Rillaboom with a bulky Assault Vest set that used knockoff to great effect, while Incineroar rocked Parting Shot and Taunt alongside Flare Blitz and Fake Out. Wolfey's Dragapult also got rid of Ally Switch and utilized Will-O-Wisp in order to mitigate physical attackers completely. The Urshifu Colossal Dragapult core once again proved its worth and gave WolfGlick the Players Cup 2 championship. The third Players Cup win came through the hands of Leonardo Bononomi, who utilized a powerful Sun combination with Groudon, Umbreon, Incineroar, Venusaur, Charizard, and Regieleki. Bononomi's team utilized Groudon's weather and the option of Gigantamaxing either of the Kanto starters to deal passive damage, as Moonlight Umbreon attempted to outlast everything on the battlefield with a combination of Snarl and Incineroar's ability to intimidate. Incineroar once again used its Assault Vest set to combat a range of special attackers present in the format, while Regieleki provided a powerful tool to utilize against rain teams while functioning as speed control through its Electro Web. The fourth Players Cup was won by Renzo Navarro, using a bulky offense team consisting of Incineroar, Landorus Therian, Tapu Fini, Amoonguss, Moltres Galar, and Regieleki. The team utilized utilize a combination of Intimidate, Cycling, and Amoonguss's Redirection in order to aid powerful special attackers like Nasty Plot Galarian Moltres and Calm Mind Tapu Fini. Renzo's Incineroar used Parting Shot and Taunt alongside Safety Goggles to deal with opposing Amoonguss Redirection. This bulky strategy secured a win for Renzo Navarro and showed the Pokemon world why Peru Escalve, while maintaining Incineroar's seemingly eternal first places at Worlds and Players Cups. The return to the offline scene for 2022 meant even more opportunities for Incineroar to shine. The 2022 format was once again a restricted format, much like the Players Cup 3 rule set in which it had excelled in. Incineroar's powerful tools and sets once again enabled some of the scariest threats around, supporting Pokemon like Groudon, Kyogre, and Lunala as it had previously done. There was one threat, however, that we had previously not mentioned because it was equally as dominant as Incineroar. The most powerful Pokemon of VGC today, Zacian, came to an inevitable clash with the most powerful Pokemon in VGC history, Incineroar. Generation 8 Zacian Crown is arguably one of the most broken Pokemon to ever be created. Just entering the battlefield means Zacian's sky-high 150 base attack stat would get an Intimidate boost upon hitting the field. Zacian was also lightning fast with 148 base speed, making it the first to move on the battlefield in almost every scenario it came across. Finally, Zacian had the unique ability to literally slice up Dynamax Pokemon with its access to Behemoth Blade, which doubled its own power when making contact with a Dynamax user. Zacian also had almost perfect coverage with its stab play rough and access to moves like Close Combat, Sacred Sword, and Wild Charge. So what could stop it? That's right, Incineroar. Zacian was not a Pokemon without weaknesses. For one, its reliance on physical attacks meant it could be intimidated, mitigating the boost received by its Intrepid Sword ability. Secondly, the ability to strike Dynamax Pokemon with its mighty Behemoth Blade came at a cost. Zacian itself could not Dynamax. This meant that Zacian was susceptible to Fake Out, which was Incineroar's signature move at this point in time. Incineroar's Flare Blitz and resistance to both stab moves also meant that he could threaten Zacian, putting a timer on an otherwise unstoppable threat. Incineroar was the most consistent answer to Zacian, which meant that more often than not, you would see VGC players bringing both on their team. Incineroar also made an incredible pair for Zacian Crowned as well. Fake Out support allowed Zacian to set up Substitute or Swords Dance and wipe out entire teams. This combination of Pokemon was so evidently overpowered that it was present in 70% of teams at the time. Stopping and aiding Zacian wasn't Incineroar's only talent. Calyrex Shadow Rider and Calyrex Ice Rider were also incredibly powerful Pokemon introduced in the Galar region's Crown Tundra. Their ability to negate barriers while simultaneously boosting with every KO, and their access to powerful spread moves like Astro Barrage and Glacial Lance meant a game could potentially be over in 2 turns. Once again, in the face of absolute power stood an absolute wall. Incineroar answered both versions of Calyrex with a Fire Dark typing that blanked all of their stab moves and put a stop to their offense. No matter who the literal top dogs were, Incineroar also rose to the occasion and continued racking up incredibly impressive wins. Its first place finishes in the 2022 VGC format are the following. Once again, Incineroar achieved the ultimate glory and became world champion, making this the 6th world tournament it won in a row, while being piloted by Eduardo Cunha. Eduardo's team consisted of Gastrodon, Calyrex Shadow Rider, Thundurus Incarnate, Rillaboom, Incineroar, and Zacian. Cunha's strategy centered around Dynamaxing Thundurus Incarnate and using Max Airstream in order to pick up quick kills with both Zacian and Calyrex Shadow Rider. The team was supported by the bulky core of Safety Goggles Parting Shot Incineroar and Assault Vest Rillaboom. And finally, much like Paul Ruiz in 2018, Eduardo Cunha brought Gastrodon as an excellent anti-meta pick that dealt beautifully with Incineroar and posed a credible threat against Zacian. Gastrodon also brought some utility to the table, using Yawn to deal with potential Dynamax Pokemon and Icy Wind to slow down the opposition, ensuring Cunha's offensive strategy would be the first to move. Incineroar quite fittingly served as king during the entirety of Sword and Shield VGC. Incineroar was released in Gen 9's Indigo Disc DLC, and by this stage of Gen 9's legendary power creep, there was no real place for it in UU or RU, so it started out in its original home of NU, and there it thrived. As vital and defining as it had been in its previous singles metagames, it still rocked the same 2 sets as always, the offensive Swords Dancer and the bulky Pivot, which were as good as ever for the same reasons as ever, but they also had incredible new opportunities thanks to terrestrialization. Both sets shared an affinity for Terra Fairy, not just for the superb utility that that made Fairy one of the most popular Terra types in general, but for how it flipped Incineroar's fighting weakness into resist and rendered its ground, water, and rock weaknesses neutralities. While the steel and poison moves that would strike Fairy super effectively generally didn't come from Pokemon that particularly enjoyed Incineroar's stab combination. It was effectively the same kind of boost Boots had been for Incineroar. The defensive pivot set became even more efficient defensively, while the Swords Dancer becoming tougher to take down served to further enable its offense. Fairy wasn't the only Terra type Incineroar could use, of course. The S-Deer enjoyed Terra Poison for that same flip of the script against fighters, while also providing a superb immunity to poison from Amoonguss and Alolan Muck. And in addition to ruining the status that would put it on a timer, it also gained a highly useful Fairy resist, letting it dominate Sylveon. Incineroar could go even further to ruin close combats, drain punches, and mock punches with Terra Ghost, going for an all-out immunity that similarly blanked normal and thus allowed it to take on Chinchino, while also ridding it of its ground weakness, unlike Poison. As for the pivot set, when it wasn't going with Terra Fairy, it went the opposite route with Terra Dragon, whose set of elemental resists gave Incineroar a series of superb resists that really let it lean into its excellent special bulk, suddenly able to take on monsters like Toxtricity, Raikou, and even pivot into Inteleon, whose water stab would normally slam it super effectively. Given how much of a terror Inteleon could be, Incineroar could trade the ability to check Toxtricity for the ability to go all in on checking Inteleon with Terra Water, becoming resistant to the Ice Beam that could still threaten it as Terra Dragon. Of course, as great as all these Terras were, Incineroar hardly needed them to succeed. Its innate talents were, once again, so valuable that it seemed like it permanently had a good matchup into everything it faced. Among its usual knockoff pivoting excellence, it spread Will-O-Wisp berms all over the place, ruining would-be checks like Flygon, Swampert, and Rhyperior, and without much in the way of safe switches in general, as the other most popular fire, Chandelure, didn't want to come anywhere near stab knockoff, so most of the time, your best option for stifling its burns were, your own Incineroar. Yeah, a familiar refrain at this point, and yes, that means it's once again time for VGC. Incineroar was noticeably absent in the release of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but it came back with a vengeance with the Indigo Disc DLC. It made sense, after all, that the academy that teaches competitive battling in-world would be the one place where you can find Incineroar in the games. Incineroar's mark on competitive history was so deep that even the in-game doubles champion has Incineroar. So how did Incineroar fare up with the never-before-seen power creep in Generation 9 and the many changes that made Intimidate and Fake Out far less strong than in the previous generations? Mechanics-wise, Generation 8 and 9 made several changes to abilities like Own Tempo, Oblivious, Inner Focus, Scrafty, and Rattled in order to combat Intimidate. The distribution of abilities like Defiant and Competitive, which not only ignored the ability but got a boost from it, became more widespread. New abilities like Guard Dog also benefited from getting intimidated as well. The introduction of the Covert Cloak item also severely hampered the effectiveness of Fake Out usage. Generation 9 also introduced powerful new Pokemon that could give Incineroar a run for its money. Fluttermane, Walking Wake, Arcaludon, Ogerpon Wellspring, both Ursaluna forms, Iron Hands, Dondozo and Tatsugiri, Tinglu, Annihilate, Iron Bundle, Great Tusk, and many other Pokemon threatened Incineroar's supremacy. To add insult to injury, Koraidon and Miraidon appeared during restricted formats, and they both had a field day when facing Incineroar as well. Generation 9's signature mechanic, Terrassalization, made it possible for any Pokemon to be any other type at a moment's notice, meaning that a Grass or Steel type that would generally be in harm's way against VGC's favorite cat could now turn the tide of battle by becoming a water type and ending Incineroar's life. The panorama looked rougher than ever for Incineroar, but Generation 9 also came with gifts for it as well. For one, it got another insane supporting move in the form of Helping Hand, allowing it to further support its teammates by boosting up damage allies could dish out. This tool was especially strong in restricted formats to guarantee a partner Miraidon, Koraidon, Terrapagos, Calyrex, or Kyogre getting a kill against a key Pokemon. Incineroar was also able to use Terrassalization in its favor, using its tremendous bulk and utility to its advantage against pretty much any matchup. Struggled with water moves? Turn Incineroar into a dragon type. Want to win the Fake Out war against other Pokemon? Incineroar can become a ghost. Struggling with those pesky fighting types? Terra Poison. Incineroar was one of the Pokemon that best utilized Terrassalization, and it quickly became apparent that even though the odds seemed stacked against it, it was still a force to be reckoned with the 2024 VGC format. All of Incineroar's strengths from previous years made it excellent as always, and now it could adapt to pretty much any threat, tailoring its moveset, Terra type, and item to patch up the team in whatever way is necessary. Incineroar leveraged its deep support moveset to great success and quickly acquired many results throughout the season. Here is a list of every first place finish that Incineroar got throughout the 2024 VGC season and its different regulations. Although Incineroar had a brilliant season as usual, for the first time since it received Intimidate, it didn't win the Pokemon World Championships. The highest placing Incineroar was Yujiang Wang, who utilized a team of Incineroar, Rillaboom, Qin-Pao, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Fluttermane, and Terapagos. The team used the age-old Intimidate Grassy Terrain combo that Assault Vest, Rillaboom, and Incineroar brought to the table. Yujiang's Incineroar held Rocky Helmet as an item, a useful tool for punishing opposing Urshifu's multi-hit Surging Strikes after Terastallization. Incineroar and Rillaboom supported the offensive core of Qin-Pao and Urshifu Rapid Strike, chipping away at the opposition, allowing the duel to tear through the defensive shell. Fluttermane also utilized a more defensive set with Icy Wind in order to help Terapagos ravage the opposition with its mighty Terra Starstorm. Overall, it was a great performance that utilized new spins on Incineroar's old repertoire in order to achieve the top 8 placing. Many, however, were left wondering why the Wrestling Cat did not win the entire thing for the first time in its Intimidate history, and the explanation can be partially attributed to the changes in the metagame and the assortment of threats that Incineroar now had to contend with, specifically Miraidon, a special attacking monster that over-centralized the metagame and warped everyone's team building needs in order to use it or counter it, much like Incineroar had done in previous years. Many such answers were powerful ground types like Landorus Therian that were capable of deleting Incineroar along with any possible Terra type that it could adopt, making things particularly hard for the cat. Although it didn't get the world's title for the 7th time in a row, it was still 6 for 6 when it did reach a final setting, just like the 91-98 Chicago Bulls. Very respectable for one of the best in history. The VGC 2025 format shared many similarities with the VGC 2024 format. It had a rotating set of regulations that alternated between restricted and non-restricted Pokemon, which brought varied results for Incineroar. For 2025's non-restricted formats, Incineroar remained an unmovable pillar of defense and support that was hard to match. The overall value that Incineroar brought to the table remained unmatched, and it was used in about 50% of teams. Although the Pokemon remained the same, there were developments in the metagame. The player base quickly figured out the power of Sneasler and how its stab combination could take advantage of the popular Incineroar Rillaboom combination. Its ability Unburden also used Grassy Terrain to its advantage, making it the fastest thing on the field and ruining Pokemon with Dire Claw's side effects, while keeping Incineroar's own Fake Out at bay by using Fake Out itself. This development caused Incineroar players to tread with caution around Sneasler, or they would be put in a losing position from the get-go. Incineroar saw some experimentation with items like Lumberry and the previously successful Rocky Helmet set that helped combat Urshifu in 2024. Incineroar users also started incorporating Terra Water to the Terra-type possibilities that it could bring to the table to better fight Urshifu and Sneasler. Some Incineroar players even chose to bring Mirror Herb to lure opponents into a false sense of security in case they wanted to boost in front of its face. Incineroar's presence in the restricted formats also maintained a similar role as it had previously performed in the 2024 format. The restricted metagame for 2025 had also evolved past Miraidon's dominance in 2024. Players quickly figured out that its past counterpart was incredible as well, and many Koraidon Sun teams raided the top spots at every event. The Calyrex forms were also as strong as ever, and perhaps even more popular than before. The last breakthrough was the use of Zamazenta Crown, who carried one of the most powerful body presses in the game and utilized Wide Guard to support its teammates. Incineroar was often a part of Koraidon Sun teams, and often served as a check to Koraidon itself, utilizing Terra Water to survive a hit and Parting Shot away. Incineroar was also quite popular with Calyrex form teams, as its newfound access to Helping Hand allowed it to rack up kills that would just not be possible without it, while also being an answer to opposing Calyrex. Incineroar only really feared Zamazenta, as its body press could easily decimate it, and Incineroar's common Terra option was Water, which meant that it was going to take significant damage anyway. The choice for items was split 50-50 between Safety Goggles, as Brute Bonnet, Amoonguss, and even Smeargle were quite popular, and risking a sleeping Pokemon was dangerous, and its now characteristic Rocky Helmet that deterred physical offense even further. Incineroar's results were once again spectacular and worthy of it being called the greatest VGC Pokemon of all time. Here are the results of every first place finish that Incineroar landed in the 2025 VGC circuit. Once again, Incineroar showed its dominance at the most important Pokemon battle rings throughout the world, but once again, it fell just short at Worlds, where it was piloted by James Evans in a team that consisted of Raging Bolt, Landorus Therian, Incineroar, Brute Bonnet, Koraidon, and Calyrex Shadow. Evans' team aimed to overpower opponents with a combination of the Sun offense that had become popularized throughout the season in the form of Koraidon and Brute Bonnet, while also having a Calyrex Shadow plus Helping Hand Incineroar mode that could switch it up at a moment's notice. Finally, the team used a bulky Assault Vest, Raging Bolt, Bolt and Landorus in order to threaten the potential Miraidon matchup and take advantage of potential Incineroar or Urshifu Rapid Strike appearances. The team also took home a 7th place championship for Incineroar, but was stopped in its tracks in the grand finals by Giovanni Chisky's Trick Room offense. Incineroar's greatest strength throughout history was its capability to adapt to any threat, but it couldn't deal with every threat at once. Although Incineroar lost once more at the greatest stage, one can only remember the legendary Michael Jordan quote when thinking about its competitive history. "I missed more than 9,000 KOs in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning party shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed." And so we can finally answer the question, how great was Incineroar actually? Well, if you couldn't tell, with all the money it's won over the years, or with the consecutive World Championship titles since it received Intimidate, Incineroar is bar none the greatest competitive Pokemon of all time for VGC. For singles, it's been relegated to the lower tiers, but it's at least a neat choice there. When Pokemon Champions comes around, I wouldn't be surprised to see it topping tournament after tournament again, as it still sees itself at the top of the bracket, even in Gen 9's absurd power creep. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Eric Dissing, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Gameslayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Seagulls Incorporated, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, Wardeen, Zathor for their major support of our videos.